8 minutes after she sent a desperate text, black jeeps surrounded the school. Teresa Boyce thought she was begging her ex-husband for child support, but the number she dialed belonged to a mafia boss who doesn't forgive mistakes. Now, with her daughter's life on the line and headlights slicing through the rain, a single text has made her the mafia's next obsession. Before we get into this, tell me, where are you watching this from right now? Comment your city below. And if this story stops you in your tracks the way it did everyone at Westmere High that night, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and like this video. Now, let's rewind to how it all started. The sun was slipping behind the school roof when Teresa Boyce sent the text that would change her life. She sat at her desk after hours, stacks of ungraded essays forming small mountains around her laptop. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering occasionally like they were just as exhausted as she felt. Outside, the parking lot emptied car by car, teachers escaping to their normal lives while she remained trapped in hers. Teresa's phone buzzed, a reminder she'd set earlier. Irene's prescription. Pick up by 6 p.m. Her daughter's fever had spiked again last night, the third time this month. Dr. Reeves had warned her that these recurring infections needed consistent medication, not the on-and-off treatment Teresa's budget allowed. But consistency cost money. Money Clay had promised, money that never came. She pulled up his contact, her thumb hovering over his name like it always did, hesitating, hating that she still had to ask him for anything. Clay, please. Irene's fever is back. I need the money this week. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. But the anger, the bone-deep exhaustion of being abandoned, wouldn't let her stop there. Her fingers moved again, reckless and desperate. You said you were working with the Viali men now. Don't make me call them myself. An empty threat. She knew nothing about Clay's new business partners except the name she'd overheard during one of his late-night phone calls before he'd left for good. Something about the Viali family, about real money finally coming through. Just another lie from a man built entirely of them. Teresa set her phone face down on the desk and pressed her hands against her eyes, trying to hold back the pressure building behind them. The reply came faster than expected. Who is this? Her stomach dropped. Wrong number? No, she'd texted Clay a dozen times before. She grabbed the phone, her breath catching when she saw the next message already appearing. You're at Westmere High, aren't you? Teresa's blood went cold. She stood slowly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. Through the classroom window, she could see the first set of headlights turning into the parking lot. Then another, and another. Black jeeps, one after another, rolling in like a storm she'd summoned without meaning to. Her phone buzzed again. Stay where you are, Teresa. 8 minutes. That's all it had been since she hit send. 3 months earlier. To understand how Teresa Boyce ended up frozen in her classroom, watching black vehicles circle her school like predators, you have to go back 3 months back to the night Clay Conrad walked out their apartment door and never came back. It hadn't been dramatic. No shouting match, no thrown dishes, no cinematic slamming of doors. Clay had simply kissed Irene goodnight, told Teresa he had a meeting, and disappeared into the humid July evening with a duffel bag she hadn't noticed until he was already gone. The first week, she'd called, left voicemails that started concerned and ended angry. The second week, she'd checked hospitals and police stations, swinging wildly between worry and rage. By the third week, when the first child support payment didn't arrive, she'd understood the truth. Clay hadn't left for a meeting, he'd left, period. What she didn't know then, what she couldn't have known, was that Clay Conrad had spent the previous 6 months working as a low-level courier for the Viali crime family, and in a moment of catastrophic stupidity mixed with desperation, he'd stolen $2 million in a ledger containing financial records that could dismantle half the organization's operations. Clay had always been a gambler. He just finally bet on the wrong game. Teresa had discovered fragments of the truth in the weeks that followed. A voicemail accidentally left on her phone, Clay's voice shaking as he spoke to someone about the Viali situation and how he just needed to lay low. A visit from a man in an expensive suit who'd asked if Mr. Conrad was home, his smile never reaching his eyes. The way her landlord had suddenly become interested in whether she was expecting any visitors. She'd pieced together enough to know Clay was involved in something dangerous, but she'd never imagined it would reach back to touch her. Not until tonight. The present. Teresa's hands trembled as she stared at her phone. The last message glowed on the screen like an accusation. "Stay where you are, Teresa." How did they know her name? How did they know where she was? The rational part of her brain, the part that graded essays and packed lunches and scheduled doctor's appointments, told her to run, lock the classroom door, call the police, do something other than stand here like a deer in headlights. But her body wouldn't move. She was frozen, watching through the window as the black jeeps formed a perimeter around the school, professional, precise, terrifying in their coordination. The last teacher's car pulled out of the lot, Miss Grant's silver Honda, and hesitated when it encountered the blockade. Teresa saw Miss Grant's brake lights flash, saw her car inch forward uncertainly, then watched as one of the jeeps simply moved aside to let her pass before sliding back into position. They weren't here for Miss Grant. They were here for her. Teresa's phone rang, the sound so sudden and sharp that she dropped it. It clattered against her desk, the screen still glowing with an unknown number. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she picked it up with shaking hands. "Hello?" Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "Miss Boyce." The voice was male, smooth, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Italian, maybe, but softened by years of American influence. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but when someone mentions my family's name in a text message, I take it seriously. I made a mistake. Wrong number. I was trying to reach Clay Conrad." "Yes, I'm aware." There was something almost amused in his tone, but it was the amusement of a predator toying with prey. "Unfortunately, Mr. Conrad and I have some unfinished business, and you just became very interesting to me. I don't know anything about his business. I'm just..." "His wife?" "Ex-wife. We're divorced. Almost." The legal paperwork was still pending, another thing Clay had abandoned halfway through. "I haven't seen him in 3 months. The sound was non-committal. "And yet you know enough to mention the Viali family by name. That's more than most civilians ever learn." Teresa's mind raced. This was bad. This was worse than bad. This was the kind of situation that happened to other people, the kind of thing you read about in news articles with headlines like, "Local woman caught in organized crime crossfire." "Please," she whispered, "I have a daughter. She's 5 years old and she's sick and she's with a babysitter right now and she needs me. Irene." The man said her daughter's name like he was reading from a file, like he'd already looked into every corner of Teresa's life. 5 years old last April. Attends Riverside Elementary, currently being treated for recurring respiratory infections by Dr. Nolan Reeves. The air left Teresa's lungs. The room tilted. "How do you..." "I know everything, Miss Boyce. It's my business to know." A pause. "Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to come outside. We're going to have a conversation. And depending on what you tell me, you're either going to go home to your daughter tonight or..." He let the sentence hang, unfinished but clear. "I'll call the police." "No, you won't." His certainty was absolute. "Because the moment you do, this becomes complicated. Police reports, investigations, your name in a database connected to mine. And Clay's enemies, because he has many, Miss Boyce. More than you know, they'll find that database. They'll find you." Teresa pressed her free hand against the desk to steady herself. "Who are you?" "Roberto Viali. And you've been texting my personal line for the past 10 minutes. His voice lowered, almost gentle. "Come outside, Teresa. I promise you, I'm not the worst thing you need to worry about tonight." The line went dead. Teresa stood in the empty classroom, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, her reflection ghostly in the darkening window. Outside, the black jeeps waited like patient shadows. She thought of Irene. Sweet, fever-bright Irene who'd asked this morning if Daddy was ever coming home. Irene who deserved a mother brave enough to protect her, even when protection meant walking into the mouth of danger itself. Teresa picked up her purse. Her hands had stopped shaking not because the fear had passed, but because she'd moved beyond fear into something else. Resignation, maybe. Or the cold clarity that comes when you realize you've already fallen and now you're just waiting to hit the ground. She walked down the empty hallway, her footsteps echoing off the lockers, past the bulletin board covered in student artwork, past the drinking fountain that never worked quite right, past the principal's office with its dark windows. The front doors of Westmere High were glass, and through them she could see the lead jeep idling directly in front of the entrance. As she approached, the driver's side door opened. A man stepped out. Even in the fading light, Teresa could see he was different from what she'd expected. Younger, maybe mid-30s, tall, with dark hair and the kind of tailored suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. There was ink on his neck tattoos creeping up from beneath his collar, but his face was clean-shaven, handsome in a sharp, dangerous way. Roberto Vialli looked at her through the glass doors, and despite the growing darkness, despite the distance between them, she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. He didn't smile, didn't gesture, simply waited. Teresa pushed open the door and stepped out into the October evening. The air smelled like rain and exhaust. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear traffic on the main road, life continuing normally for everyone except her. Miss Boyce. Roberto's voice matched the man, controlled, intelligent, dangerous. Thank you for cooperating. Did I have a choice? Everyone has choices. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. You chose to mention my family's name. You chose to come outside. These are choices. Forced choices. Still choices. He stepped closer, and Teresa fought the urge to step back. She wouldn't give him that, wouldn't show more fear than she already had. Tell me about Clay. There's nothing to tell. He left 3 months ago, hasn't contacted me since, hasn't sent money, hasn't called, hasn't... Her voice cracked. He just left. And the text message? The Vialli men? I overheard him on the phone once, before he disappeared. He mentioned your family, said something about finally having real money coming. I thought, she swallowed, I thought if I threatened to contact you, he might actually respond. I didn't think I had the real number. I didn't think anyone would actually track you down in 8 minutes, Roberto finished. A slight curve touched his lips, but it wasn't quite a smile. My family takes our privacy very seriously, Miss Boyce. When someone mentions our name, we respond, quickly. Behind him, the other jeeps had formed a perfect semicircle. Men stood beside them silent, watchful, dressed in dark clothing that made them look like extensions of the vehicles themselves. I'm sorry, Teresa whispered. I made a mistake. I just wanted money for my daughter's medicine, that's all. I don't know anything about whatever Clay did. I don't want to know, please, just let me go home. Roberto was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face for something she couldn't name. Finally, he spoke. Clay didn't just leave you, Teresa. He stole from my family. $2 million and a ledger that contains information people would kill for. He paused, letting that sink in. And to cover his tracks, he used your name, your social security number, your identity. The ground seemed to shift beneath her feet. What? Bank accounts opened in your name, transfers made with your information. On paper, Teresa Boyce is the thief, not Clay Conrad. His expression was unreadable. So you see, you're not just connected to this situation. According to my records, you are this situation. No, I would never. I believe you. The words were unexpected. But belief doesn't matter. Evidence matters. And the evidence says you're involved. Teresa's mind spun. This couldn't be happening. This was impossible. She was a teacher. She graded essays and attended PTA meetings and bought generic brand cereal because the name brand was too expensive. She wasn't involved in organized crime. She wasn't. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Roberto looked at her for another long moment. Then he turned slightly, gesturing to the school building behind her. Sister Helena Carter, your supervisor. She's been watching from the second-floor window for the past 5 minutes. He looked back at Teresa. You should go home to your daughter, Miss Boyce. Kiss her goodnight. Pretend for tonight that everything is normal. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, we'll see if Clay's enemies are as efficient at finding you as I was. He pulled a business card from his jacket pocket and held it out. When they do not when you call this number, immediately. Teresa took the card with numb fingers. Heavy cardstock. Minimalist design, just a phone number, no name. Why would you help me? I'm not helping you. I'm protecting my interests. Roberto stepped back toward his Jeep. But if Clay's enemies find you first, they won't be as patient as I've been tonight. They'll assume you know where he is, they'll assume you have access to what he stole, and they'll hurt you and your daughter to get those answers. He opened his door, paused. 8 minutes, Teresa. That's all it took for your world to change. Remember that. The Jeep's engine roared to life. One by one, the other vehicles followed. Within seconds, they were pulling out of the parking lot, disappearing into the darkening streets as quickly as they'd arrived. Teresa stood alone in front of Westmere High, a business card clutched in her trembling hand, and the weight of everything that had just happened pressing down on her chest like a stone. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Chen, her babysitter. Irene's asking when you'll be home. Fever's down a bit. Teresa looked at the message, then at the card, then at the empty parking lot where 8 minutes ago her entire life had been normal. She didn't know it yet, but normal was already gone. And it was never coming back. Teresa's keys felt like ice in her hand as she pushed through the front doors of Westmere High. The October air hit her face crisp, clean, completely at odds with the suffocating dread coiling in her chest. The parking lot stretched before her like a stage, spotlit by the Jeep's headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. She'd expected chaos, sirens maybe, police, something that made sense in the normal world she'd inhabited just 20 minutes ago. Instead, there was only silence, the kind of silence that pressed against your eardrums, the kind that made you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing, the small sounds of your body trying to keep functioning when your brain was screaming at you to run. 3 black Jeeps formed a semicircle near the entrance. A 4th blocked the exit to the main road. Men stood beside each vehicle still, professional, their dark clothing making them look like shadows given human form. And in the center of it all, leaning against the lead Jeep with the casual confidence of someone who owned not just the parking lot but everything in it, was a man who could only be Roberto Vialli. He was younger than she'd imagined, mid-30s maybe, with dark hair styled in that effortless way that probably required more product than she spent on groceries. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, the kind that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. But it was his stillness that struck her most, the complete lack of fidgeting, of nervous energy, of anything that suggested he was doing anything other than exactly what he wanted to be doing. Tattoos crept up from his collar, dark ink against olive skin. She caught glimpses of symbols, letters, designs she couldn't make out in the fading light. He straightened as she approached, and the movement drew every eye in the parking lot to her. Teresa forced herself to keep walking, one foot in front of the other. Don't look at the men, don't think about how many there are, don't think about Irene waiting at home, about Mrs. Chen checking her watch, about how a normal evening had become this. Miss Boyce. Roberto's voice carried across the space between them, smooth, cultured, with just a hint of an accent that made her think of old movies and Mediterranean coastlines. Thank you for joining us. Joining us? Like this was a social gathering, like she'd had a choice. You said we needed to talk. Teresa stopped several feet away, maintaining distance even though she knew it was meaningless. If he wanted to close that gap, he would. So, talk. A flicker of something crossed his face. Amusement, maybe. Or interest. It disappeared so quickly she might have imagined it. Direct. I appreciate that. He gestured to the building behind her. Though I notice your colleague is still watching from the second floor. Sister Helena, isn't it? Your supervisor. Teresa didn't turn around, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her look. Should I be concerned about her safety? Should she be concerned about yours? Roberto countered. Then, before Teresa could respond, he added, No one here is in danger, Miss Boyce. Not yet. This is simply a conversation. Conversations don't usually require 4 vehicles and, she glanced around, counting quickly, 8 armed men. You'd be surprised what conversations require in my line of work. He tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Clay Conrad, your husband, ex-husband. The paperwork suggests otherwise. The paperwork is delayed. We've been separated for 3 months. I haven't seen him, haven't heard from him, don't know where he is. The words came out in a rush, defensive and desperate. Whatever he did, I had nothing to do with it. He stole from my family. Roberto said it casually, like he was discussing the weather. $2 million in cash, and a ledger containing financial records that, in the wrong hands, could be very problematic for my business interests. Teresa's stomach dropped. $2 million. The number was so absurd it almost didn't register. Clay could barely keep $50 in his wallet without finding a way to lose it. That's impossible. Clay doesn't have that kind of access to. He did when he worked for me. Roberto pushed off from the Jeep, taking a single step forward. Just one, but it closed the distance between them in a way that made Teresa's breath catch. 6 months as a courier, low-level work, moving packages, making deliveries, keeping his mouth shut. He was adequate, forgettable, which is exactly what made him useful. I didn't know he worked for you. No? Roberto's eyebrow lifted slightly. You didn't wonder why a man who couldn't hold down a job at a car wash suddenly had money for new clothes, better shoes, that watch he wore? She had wondered. Of course she had, but questioning Clay's sudden fortune had always led to arguments, to his defensive anger, to accusations that she didn't trust him. Eventually, she'd stopped asking. It had seemed easier. Now that silence felt like complicity. He told me he was working construction, she whispered. He was constructing a new life, one that didn't include you or your daughter. Roberto's expression didn't change, but something in his voice sharpened. 3 months ago, Clay was tasked with transporting a payment from one of our associates, $2 million in cash. He was supposed to deliver it to a secure location. He never arrived. Maybe something happened to him. Maybe he decided $2 million was worth more than his life. Roberto pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, then turned it to face her. This was taken 4 days ago. Tampa, Florida. Does he look like someone who's in danger? The photo showed Clay. Definitely Clay. Sitting at an outdoor cafe, sunglasses pushed up on his head, a beer in his hand, and a woman Teresa didn't recognize laughing beside him. He looked relaxed, happy, healthy. He looked like a man on vacation. Not like a man whose daughter was sick. Not like a man who'd left his family drowning in bills and desperation. Something hot and sharp twisted in Teresa's chest, not quite anger, not quite grief, but something that tasted like both. I don't know where he is, she said, her voice harder now. And I don't care. He made his choices. They have nothing to do with me. Unfortunately, they do. Roberto pocketed his phone. Clay didn't just steal from me, Miss Boyce. He covered his tracks using your identity. The world tilted. What? Bank accounts opened in your name, transfers made with your social security number, phone records, email accounts, paper trails, all of it points back to you. Roberto watched her process this, his expression unreadable. As far as the evidence shows, Teresa Boyce is the one who stole $2 million from the Vialli family, not Clay Conrad. That's insane. I don't even know how to. I know. The certainty in his voice stopped her spiral. You're a teacher. You live in a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that's generous to call working class. Your bank account has $473 in it. You're not a thief. Then why? Because Clay is a coward who knew I'd come looking, and he knew that pointing me toward you would buy him time. Roberto's jaw tightened, the first real emotion she'd seen from him. He used you as a shield, Miss Boyce, and now you're standing in a parking lot surrounded by men who work for me because your husband decided you were expendable. Teresa's legs felt weak. She wanted to sit down, to put her head between her knees, to wake up from whatever nightmare this had become. So what happens now? The question came out smaller than she'd intended. You know I didn't do it. You just said, I believe you didn't do it, but belief and proof are different things. Roberto glanced past her shoulder, and Teresa heard movement behind her, one of his men approaching. And more importantly, there are others looking for Clay. Others who won't be as patient as I'm being, who won't care about your daughter or your innocence, who will see your name on those accounts and assume you know where the money is. The man who'd approached handed Roberto a tablet. He glanced at it, his expression darkening. Marco? He said quietly. 3 more accounts just surfaced. the man Marco apparently replied. His voice was deeper, rougher than Roberto's. All under her name, all opened in the last 6 weeks. Roberto's eyes met Teresa's, and for the first time, she saw something that might have been sympathy. "Then you're already part of it," he said simply. "Whether you knew it or not, whether you wanted to be or not." He turned slightly, addressing the men around them without raising his voice. "No one leaves until we confirm she's clean. Full background check, phone records, financial history, everything." One of the men nodded and moved toward another jeep, already pulling out a laptop. Teresa's mind raced. "You can't just I have rights. I can call—" "Who?" Roberto asked, not unkindly. "The police? And tell them what? That your ex-husband worked for the Mafia and stole money in your name? That you're being questioned by men you can't identify about crimes you can't prove you didn't commit?" He paused. "Or worse, you call them, and Clay's other enemies see the police report, see your name, and they find you before I can figure out if you're an asset or a liability." The word liability hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Teresa looked at the faces surrounding her, professional, cold, waiting for orders. She thought of Irene, of Mrs. Chen checking her watch, of normal evenings that would never come again. "How long?" she whispered. "As long as it takes." Roberto moved back toward his jeep. "I suggest you call your babysitter, Miss Boyce. Tell her you're working late. And pray that when we're finished here, I still believe you're innocent." He climbed into the vehicle, the door shutting with a solid final sound. And Teresa stood in the center of the parking lot, surrounded by men who could end her life with a word from their boss, and realized that 8 minutes ago she'd been worried about the cost of antibiotics. Now she was worried about whether she'd live to see morning. The school's administrative office had never felt so small. Teresa sat in Sister Helena's chair. The irony wasn't lost on her while Roberto Vialli stood by the window, his silhouette dark against the Venetian blinds. One of his men, the one called Marco, had positioned himself by the door, not blocking it exactly, just present. The overhead fluorescent light buzzed like an angry insect. Teresa focused on that sound, on anything other than the way Roberto's attention felt like weight pressing against her skin. "Your daughter's medical bills," Roberto said without preamble, his back still to her. $7,000 over the past 6 months. Insurance covers 60%. You're paying the rest in installments of $250 monthly. You're 3 months behind. Teresa's throat tightened. "How do you—" "Dr. Nolan Reeves, Riverside Pediatric Care. You called his office 4 times last week trying to get an extension on Irene's prescription." He turned from the window, and the light caught the sharp planes of his face. "The receptionist told you they couldn't release medication without payment. You cried in the parking lot for 11 minutes before driving home." The air left her lungs. Not because he knew, though, that was terrifying enough, but because he described the exact moment she'd felt most broken, most alone. "Are you trying to intimidate me?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm trying to understand you." Roberto moved closer, pulling out the chair across from her and sitting down. The movement was fluid, economical. Everything about him was controlled. "Clay left you drowning in debt. Medical bills, rent, utilities. You make $42,000 a year before taxes. After expenses, you have less than $300 monthly for food, gas, and everything else. I manage. You survive." His eyes dark, penetrating, held hers. "There's a difference. So when a man like Clay comes to you and says he has money, real money for the first time in his life, what did you think?" Teresa's jaw tightened. "I thought he was lying, like always. But you hoped he wasn't." The words hit harder than an accusation, because they were true. God help her, they were true. Even knowing Clay's history, even understanding that his promises were built on sand, some desperate part of her had hoped. "Hoping isn't a crime," she whispered. "No, but it makes you vulnerable." Roberto leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed, but his attention absolute. "Tell me about the night of July 14th. "I already told you, he said he had a meeting. What was he wearing?" The question threw her. What? His clothes? What was Clay wearing when he left? Teresa's mind scrambled backward. Jeans, a black shirt, his leather jacket, the new one he'd bought a few weeks before. Expensive jacket. Everything became expensive with Clay toward the end. She pressed her palms against her thighs, trying to ground herself. Designer jeans, nice watches, he said business was good. Did he take anything else? Luggage, documents, a duffel bag. Gray. I didn't think much of it at the time. He sometimes stayed overnight when he had early meetings. Her voice cracked slightly. Except the meetings were never real, were they? Roberto didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out his phone, scrolled briefly, then turned the screen toward her. This was taken at a storage facility in Newark, 2 days before Clay disappeared. The photo showed Clay loading boxes into a unit. Even from the security camera's angle, Teresa could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept looking over his shoulder. "I've never been to Newark," she said. "I know, but the storage unit was rented in your name, your signature on the contract, your credit card for payment." Teresa stared at the image, nausea rising in her throat. "That's not my signature. It's close enough to pass initial verification." Roberto pocketed his phone. Clay was thorough, I'll give him that. He spent months building a paper trail that leads directly to you. Why? The word came out raw. Why would he do this to me, to Irene? Because men like Clay don't think about consequences, they think about survival. Roberto's expression was unreadable. And you were convenient. The casual cruelty of it, the matter-of-fact way he described her husband's betrayal, made something inside Teresa crack. Not break, exactly, but shift, harden. "What do you want from me?" she asked, meeting his gaze directly. "I can't tell you where he is. I can't give you money I don't have. I can't undo whatever he's done. So what do you want?" Before Roberto could answer, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Excuse me," he stood, moving toward the window as he answered, "Yes." Teresa couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she watched Roberto's posture change. Subtle shifts, his shoulders straightening, his free hand forming a loose fist. "When?" A pause. "And the federal investigation?" Another pause, longer this time. "Keep monitoring." He ended the call and stood silent for a moment, his back to her, before turning around. "Clay's been confirmed in Tampa. Federal agents opened an investigation this morning into stolen funds from several East Coast organizations, including mine." His voice was even, but Teresa heard the undercurrent of controlled anger, which means this situation just became significantly more complicated. Complicated how? Federal attention draws other attention. Clay's theft wasn't just from my family, Miss Boyce. He took from others. And those others are now looking for answers. Roberto moved back toward her, and for the first time, she saw something that might have been concern in his expression. "They'll find your name in those accounts. They'll come looking, and they won't be as patient as I've been." The room felt colder suddenly. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you have a choice." Roberto pulled a card from his jacket pocket, heavy cardstock, minimalist design, just a phone number. "You come with me. I put you and your daughter under protection while we sort through Clay's mess. Or you go home tonight. Hope that Clay's enemies are slower than my intelligence network. Hope they're less thorough. Hope they believe you when you say you're innocent." He placed the card on the desk between them. "How lucky do you feel, Teresa?" She stared at the card, at the single phone number that represented a choice between the devil she'd just met and the devil she hadn't. "I'm not going anywhere with you," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I have a daughter who needs stability, not whatever world you're offering." Roberto studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, just a faint curve of his lips, but it transformed his face from intimidating to something almost human. "Then pray they're slower than my men," he said quietly. He moved toward the door, Marco stepping aside to let him pass, but Roberto paused at the threshold, looking back at her. "That number works 24 hours. When, not if. When you realize you need help, call it." His eyes held hers. "I won't offer twice, Miss Boyce." Then he was gone, Marco following, their footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. Teresa sat alone in Sister Helena's office, the business card on the desk like a loaded gun, and listened as the Jeep's engines started outside. One by one, they pulled away, and she was left with silence, fear, and the terrible certainty that Roberto Vialli was right about one thing. This wasn't over. It had barely begun. The next morning, Westmere High felt like a different place. Teresa noticed it the moment she walked through the front doors, the way conversations stopped mid-sentence, the sideways glances that followed her down the hallway, the whispers that started up again the second she passed. Miss Grant stood by the coffee maker in the teacher's lounge, her voice carrying just loud enough to be intentional. 8 black vehicles, I counted them, military style, completely surrounding the parking lot. The room went silent when Teresa entered. "Morning," Teresa said, her voice artificially bright as she reached for a mug. "Teresa." Miss Grant's smile was thin, curious, predatory. "We were so worried last night. Those cars, was everything all right?" "Fine. Just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding that required that many vehicles?" Another teacher, Mr. Patterson, leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "We almost called the police." "Good thing you didn't," Teresa said, pouring coffee with hands that only trembled slightly. "Like I said, misunderstanding." She could feel their eyes on her back as she left, could hear the whispers restart before she'd even cleared the doorway. If you're enjoying Teresa's story and want to see what happens when she's forced to make an impossible choice, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. New chapters drop every week, and trust me, you won't want to miss what Roberto Vialli does next. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Sister Helena was waiting outside Teresa's classroom, her expression a careful blend of concern and professional distance. "Miss Boyce, a word?" It wasn't a request. Teresa followed her supervisor into the empty classroom, closing the door behind them. "I'm going to ask you once," Sister Helena said, her voice low. "Is there something I need to know? Something that might affect the safety of our students?" "No, I promise, it was a misunderstanding." "Yes, I heard." Sister Helena's eyes, usually warm, were cool now, assessing. "But misunderstandings don't usually involve that level of response. And I've been doing this job long enough to recognize when someone's in trouble." Teresa's throat tightened. She wanted to tell the truth. Wanted to spill everything about Clay, about the theft, about Roberto Vialli and his calm threats and the business card currently burning a hole in her purse. But the words wouldn't come. "I'm handling it," she said instead. "Are you?" Sister Helena moved closer, and for a moment her professional mask slipped. "Because from where I'm standing, you look terrified. And whatever you're handling, Teresa, it doesn't belong near these children." The warning was clear. Get your life together, or get out. "It won't happen again," Teresa whispered. Sister Helena held her gaze for another long moment, then nodded curtly. "See that it doesn't." The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Teresa taught her classes on autopilot, her mind racing through everything Roberto had told her. The accounts in her name, Clay's betrayal, the federal investigation, Clay's enemies are looking for you. During lunch, she called Dr. Reeves' office to schedule Irene's follow-up appointment. "I'm afraid we can't schedule anything until the outstanding balance is addressed," the receptionist said, her tone apologetic but firm. "I'm working on it. Please, she needs." "I understand, Miss Boyce, but our policy is clear." Teresa ended the call and pressed her forehead against her desk, fighting back tears. $373 in her account, $7,000 in debt, and a daughter who needed medication she couldn't afford. The afternoon brought more whispers, more stares. By the time the final bell rang, Teresa felt like her skin was too tight, like she might shatter if anyone looked at her too hard. She was packing her bag when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Her hands froze. It buzzed again. A text this time. "Check your car before you get in. Back left tire." Teresa's blood went cold. She grabbed her keys and practically ran to the parking lot, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her car sat in its usual spot, looking normal, untouched. She circled around to the back left tire and stopped. Someone had slashed it. Clean, deliberate. But that wasn't what made her breath catch. Tucked into the wheel well was an envelope. Teresa looked around the parking lot empty except for a few distant cars, then pulled it out with shaking hands. Inside were photographs. Her and Irene at the park. 3 days ago. Irene at school pickup. Yesterday. Teresa at the grocery store. Last week. And underneath them all, a note in block letters. "Clay owes us. You'll pay." Her phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. Now do you understand? They're not as patient as I am, RV. Teresa stood in the empty parking lot, photographs trembling in her hands, and realized she'd been wrong about everything. She wasn't safe. She'd never been safe, and Roberto Vialli had known it all along. Her phone felt like lead as she pulled out his business card and dialed the number with numb fingers. He answered on the first ring. I was wondering how long it would take, Roberto said quietly. Someone slashed my tire, left photos of my daughter. Teresa's voice cracked. Who are they? Competitors. People Clay stole from before he got to my money. A pause. Where are you? The school parking lot. Stay there. I'm sending Marco. He'll bring you to me. I don't want to, Teresa. The way he said her name stopped her protest cold. The time for choices is over. You're coming with me, or you're waiting for them to make their next move. And trust me, photographs are just the beginning. The line went dead. Teresa stood there, clutching her phone and the envelope full of photos, and understood with terrible clarity that 8 minutes had changed her life. But it was this moment, standing in an empty parking lot, waiting for a man she barely knew to save her from enemies she'd never made, that would define what came next. She just prayed Irene would forgive her for it. Marco arrived in a black sedan, less conspicuous than the Jeeps, but no less intimidating. He didn't speak during the drive to her apartment, didn't ask questions about the photos or the slashed tire, just drove with a kind of focused efficiency that suggested he'd done this 1,000 times before. Teresa clutched her purse in her lap, the envelope of photographs inside like a ticking bomb. When they pulled up to her building, a tired 3-story walk-up in a neighborhood that was trying hard to be called up and coming, 2 more vehicles were already there. Men in dark clothing stood by the entrance, their presence transforming her ordinary street into something from a movie she didn't want to be in. Mrs. Chen, my babysitter, Teresa started. Already compensated and sent home, Marco said, his voice gravel rough. Boss's orders. Boss. The word made something twist in Teresa's stomach. She climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment. Marco, a silent shadow behind her. The door was unlocked, she never left it unlocked, and when she pushed it open, her breath caught. Roberto Vialli stood in her small living room, looking impossibly out of place among her second-hand furniture and Irene's scattered toys. He'd removed his suit jacket, and in his white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, he looked somehow more dangerous, more real. 2 of his men were checking the windows, another examining the doorframe. Irene? Teresa pushed past Roberto toward the bedroom. Asleep, he said. I checked on her myself 5 minutes ago. Teresa stopped, turning to face him. You went into my daughter's room? To ensure she was safe. Yes. His expression was maddeningly calm. Would you prefer I'd left that to chance? She wanted to be angry, wanted to feel violated, to throw him out, to reclaim some control over her rapidly disintegrating life. But when she looked into his dark eyes, all she saw was the truth he'd been telling her from the beginning. She wasn't safe, and neither was Irene. Your door lock is a joke, Roberto continued, moving toward her small kitchen table where someone had spread out the photographs. A child could bypass it. Your windows don't lock properly. The fire escape is accessible from the alley. He looked at her. You might as well have hung a welcome sign for anyone looking to get in. I can't afford better, Teresa said, her voice tight. Some of us don't have unlimited resources for home security. No, you just have unlimited exposure to people who want to hurt you. Roberto picked up one of the photos Irene at school, her pink backpack bright against the gray sidewalk. These were taken by the Marchetti family, competitors of mine who Clay also stole from. They're considerably less patient than I am. Teresa's hands trembled as she set down her purse. What do they want? The same thing everyone wants, their money back, the ledger Clay stole. Roberto set the photo down carefully. They think you know where both are, and they're willing to hurt your daughter to make you tell them. The room tilted. Teresa gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. I don't know anything. I've told you that. I've told everyone. I believe you. Roberto moved closer, and Teresa caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and dark that didn't belong in her cheap apartment. But the Marchettis won't care about belief. They'll care about results. One of his men appeared from the hallway. Apartment's clear, boss, but there are signs someone's been watching. Cigarette butts in the alley, fresh. Wrong brand for the residents here. Roberto's jaw tightened. How long? Based on the quantity? At least 3 days. Teresa felt sick. 3 days. Someone had been watching her home for 3 days while she'd gone about her life, teaching classes and making dinner and kissing Irene goodnight, completely oblivious to the danger circling them like sharks. Pack a bag, Roberto said, turning back to her. Essentials for you and Irene. Enough for a week. A week? I can't just... I have work. Irene has school. You have enemies who know where you live, where you work, where your daughter goes to school. His voice was patient but unyielding. You can argue with me about disrupting routines, or you can accept that those routines are what makes you predictable, vulnerable. So what? I'm supposed to just go with you? Trust a man I met yesterday? Teresa heard the hysteria creeping into her voice and couldn't stop it. You're a criminal. You said so yourself. Why should I believe you want to help me? Because if I wanted to hurt you, you'd already be hurt. Roberto's bluntness was almost refreshing after so many careful lies. I don't need to earn your trust, Teresa. I need to keep you alive long enough to find Clay and recover what he stole. Everything else is secondary. How comforting. It should be. He moved past her toward the hallway. Because it means I have a vested interest in your safety. The Marchettis don't. Teresa followed him to Irene's bedroom door. Through the crack, she could see her daughter sleeping, her small chest rising and falling, her stuffed rabbit clutched in one arm. 5 years old, innocent, completely dependent on Teresa to protect her. And Teresa had failed, had let Clay's chaos reach back and touch the one person who should have been safe. 8 minutes, Roberto said quietly beside her. That's all it took for danger to find you the first time. How long before it happens again? How long before they don't just leave photos? Teresa closed her eyes. She thought about Clay in Tampa, drinking beer and laughing with strangers while she stood here making impossible choices. Thought about the federal investigation, the rival syndicates, the web of lies that had been spun around her without her knowledge or consent. Thought about Irene waking up tomorrow morning, asking about breakfast and cartoons, having no idea her world was about to change. If you're wondering whether Teresa will accept Roberto's protection and what price she'll have to pay for it, you need to keep watching. This is where everything changes, where a desperate mother becomes something she never imagined. Hit like if you're invested in seeing how this unfolds, and subscribe because I promise you, the next chapter will break your heart before it puts it back together. Don't miss what happens when Irene meets the man who's about to become their greatest threat and their only hope. 1 week, Teresa said, finally opening her eyes. 1 week, and then we reassess. Roberto inclined his head slightly. Agreed. She moved past him into Irene's room, careful not to wake her as she pulled out a small suitcase from the closet. Clothes, toys, the rabbit that Irene couldn't sleep without. Her hands worked on autopilot while her mind raced through everything she was about to do. Leave her home. Trust a man she didn't know. Bring her daughter into a world of violence and crime, and she'll be safe. Roberto's voice came from the doorway. Whatever else happens, Teresa, your daughter will be protected. You have my word. And what's your word worth? In my world? Everything. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her pack. I don't make promises I can't keep. It's bad for business. This isn't business. This is my life. In my world, they're the same thing. Teresa wanted to argue, but there was something in his tone, something almost tired, that made her pause. She looked at him properly for the first time since he'd appeared in her living room. Saw the tension in his shoulders despite his casual stance, the shadows under his eyes that suggested he slept as poorly as she did. Do you have children? The question surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. No. Then how can you possibly understand? I was one once. Roberto's expression shifted, became something harder to read. And I watched my mother make impossible choices to keep me and my brother safe. So, when I tell you I understand what you're sacrificing right now, believe me. The silence stretched between them, weighted with things neither of them wanted to say. Teresa finished packing Irene's bag, then moved to her own bedroom. Clothes, documents, Irene's medical records. The basics of a life packed into 2 small suitcases, ready to be carried away from everything familiar. When she was done, Roberto's men carried the bags downstairs. Teresa stood in Irene's doorway one last time, then gently scooped her daughter into her arms. Irene stirred, blinking sleepily. "Mama?" "Shh, baby, we're going on a little trip." "Where?" Irene's voice was muzzy with sleep. "Somewhere safe." Roberto appeared beside them, and to Teresa's surprise, he crouched down to Irene's eye level. "Hello, Irene," he said, his voice softer than Teresa had heard it. "My name is Roberto. I'm a friend of your mother's." Irene studied him with the serious consideration only children could manage. "You're tall." "I am." "Do you have a rabbit?" Roberto's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "No, but I have a very large dog named Apollo. Would you like to meet him?" Irene's eyes widened. "A dog?" "The biggest dog you've ever seen." Roberto stood, then held out his hand. "Come on, let's get you to the car." And that's when it happened, the moment that would replay in Teresa's mind for weeks afterward. Irene, still half asleep and trusting in the way only children can be, reached out and took Roberto Vialli's hand. The sight of her daughter's small fingers wrapped around the hand of a man whose world was built on violence and crime made something crack in Teresa's chest. Roberto looked down at Irene, then up at Teresa, and for just a moment she saw something in his expression that might have been discomfort, or fear, or recognition that he'd just become responsible for something far more fragile than money or power. They walked down the stairs together, Teresa carrying one suitcase, Marco carrying the other, and Roberto holding Irene's hand as she chattered sleepily about dogs and rabbits and whether they were going somewhere with a pool. The Jeep waited at the curb, its dark paint gleaming under the streetlights. Roberto lifted Irene into the back seat with surprising gentleness, helping her with the seatbelt. Teresa slid in beside her daughter, and Marco took the driver's seat. As they pulled away from the apartment from the life Teresa had built from the ruins Clay had left behind, she looked back once, saw the lit windows of her home growing smaller, saw the neighborhood she knew disappearing into the distance, and understood that 8 minutes had changed her life. But this moment, this choice would define it. Roberto sat in the front passenger seat, his phone already out, issuing quiet orders to someone on the other end, coordinating their arrival probably, making sure his world was ready to swallow them whole. Irene's head dropped against Teresa's shoulder, already asleep again. And Teresa, for the first time since Clay had walked out, allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd made the right choice. Even if the man offering protection was the devil himself, Teresa woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows she didn't recognize. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. The bed was too soft, the sheets too expensive, the ceiling too high. Then memory crashed back the photographs, the slashed tire, Roberto's hand holding Irene's as they'd walked to the Jeep. She sat up quickly, heart racing. "Irene?" Next room. A woman's voice, accented and professional, came from near the door. "Still sleeping. I'm Elena. Mr. Vialli assigned me to help you get settled." Teresa turned to find a middle-aged woman in casual but expensive clothing standing in the doorway, not quite a servant, not quite a guard, something in between. "What time is it?" 7:30. "Breakfast is at 8 if you'd like to join Mr. Vialli, or I can bring something to your room." Teresa threw back the cover's silk, she realized, actual silk, and stood. She was still wearing yesterday's clothes, wrinkled now and completely wrong for wherever she'd landed. "I need to see my daughter." Elena stepped aside, gesturing to the hallway. Second door on the left. The hallway was ridiculous. Marble floors that probably cost more than Teresa's annual salary, crown molding that belonged in a museum, artwork on the walls that looked original. Everything whispered old money and careful taste. Teresa found Irene's room and pushed open the door. Her daughter was starfished across a bed twice her size, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, sleeping peacefully in a room that looked like it belonged to a princess. Pale pink walls, white furniture, even a small chandelier casting soft light across the space. Someone had unpacked Irene's bag. Her clothes were folded in the dresser, her toys arranged on shelves that hadn't existed in their apartment. "Mr. Vialli had the room prepared last night," Elena said quietly behind her. "He thought your daughter would be more comfortable with familiar things around her." Teresa's throat tightened. She didn't want to feel grateful to Roberto Vialli. didn't want to acknowledge the care in that gesture, but standing in this perfect room, watching Irene sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks, she couldn't deny it. Where is he? The gym. He trains every morning at 5. It was 7:30 now, 2.5 hours of training. Teresa thought of her own morning routine, hitting snooze 3 times, stumbling to the coffee maker, barely functional before her second cup. I'd like to see the rest of the house. Elena's smile was knowing. Of course, the mansion was exactly what Teresa had feared, a monument to wealth and power that made her feel like a stain on its perfection. Every room they passed was immaculate, designed with the kind of attention to detail that came from unlimited resources and refined taste. They found Roberto in what Elena called the library, a room lined floor to ceiling with books, leather chairs positioned near a fireplace, morning light streaming through tall windows. He stood near a desk, reading something on his tablet, wearing dark slacks and a fitted black t-shirt that showed the full extent of the tattoos on his arms. His hair was damp, probably from a post-workout shower. He looked up when they entered, and something in his expression shifted, softened, maybe, though with him it was hard to tell. Teresa, I hope you slept well. Where are we? Westchester County, about 40 minutes from the city. He set down the tablet. The estate is secure. 24-hour surveillance, trained security, and enough distance from your normal life that Clay's enemies won't think to look here. For how long? As long as necessary. Roberto moved around the desk, and Teresa noticed he was barefoot. The small human detail felt jarring against his usual composed perfection. Elena will help you get anything you need. Clothes, toiletries, whatever Irene requires. Just ask. I don't want your charity. It's not charity. It's investment. His lips quirked slightly. I told you I have a vested interest in keeping you safe. Before Teresa could respond, the sound of heels on marble echoed from the hallway. Sharp, staccato clicks that announced someone's arrival before they appeared. The woman who entered was stunning in the way that made other women instinctively aware of their own flaws. Long dark hair, perfect makeup despite the early hour, wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than Teresa's car. She moved with the confidence of someone who belonged here, who'd walked these halls many times before. Her eyes swept over Teresa with the kind of assessment that took in everything and found it lacking. Roberto, darling, I didn't realize you had guests. The pause before guests was deliberate, cutting. Roberto's expression went carefully neutral. Myra, I wasn't expecting you. Clearly. Myra's smile was beautiful and venomous. Though I suppose I should have called first, you've been so busy lately. Her gaze slid back to Teresa. With charity cases. Teresa felt her spine straighten. Excuse me? Oh, I'm sorry. That was rude. Myra's tone suggested she wasn't sorry at all. It's just that Roberto has always had a weakness for broken things. Stray dogs, lost causes, women who need saving. She moved closer to Roberto, her hand landing possessively on his arm, though usually he doesn't bring them home. Myra. Roberto's voice was quiet but held an edge Teresa hadn't heard before, something cold and final. Teresa is under my protection. You will treat her with respect. Myra's perfectly manicured fingers tightened on his arm. Protection? Is that what we're calling it now? That's what it is. Roberto removed her hand with deliberate care. And you're not welcome here without an invitation. I thought I made that clear the last time. Something flickered across Myra's face, hurt, maybe, beneath the anger. You're really choosing her over me? Some nobody with a deadbeat husband and a sick kid? I'm not choosing anyone. I'm doing my job. Roberto's tone was flat, professional. Now leave, before I have Marco escort you out. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Myra looked between Roberto and Teresa, her expression twisting into something ugly. You'll regret this, both of you. She turned on her heel and stalked out, her heels clicking in angry rhythm against the marble. Teresa released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. I apologize for that, Roberto said, running a hand through his still damp hair. Myra and I have history. I thought I'd made it clear that history was finished. She seems to think otherwise. What Myra thinks is no longer my concern. He looked at Teresa, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked almost uncomfortable. She has no claim on me. and no right to speak to you that way." Teresa should have been focused on the threat Myra represented, the jealousy, the potential danger of a scorned woman with connections to Roberto's world. Instead, she found herself noticing the way morning light caught in his dark eyes, the precise line of his jaw, the unexpected vulnerability in his apology. She looked away quickly. "I should check on Irene." "Of course." But he didn't move, and neither did she. The space between them felt charged somehow, weighted with things neither of them wanted to acknowledge. "Teresa." She looked back. "You're safe here. Whatever else happens, whatever complications arise," he glanced toward where Myra had disappeared, "you and Irene are protected. That's not negotiable." The sincerity in his voice did something to her chest, made it hard to breathe in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why do you care so much about keeping us safe?" Roberto was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, "Because someone should." The words hung between them, simple, devastating, more honest than anything else he'd said to her. Teresa nodded, not trusting her voice, and turned to leave. But she felt his gaze on her back all the way to the door, and when she glanced back, he was still watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Neither of them named what had just passed between them, but they both felt it. And in the days to come, that unspoken spark would become the most dangerous thing in the mansion. More dangerous than Myra's jealousy. More dangerous than Clay's enemies. More dangerous than the truth they were both trying to avoid. 3 days into her stay at the mansion, Teresa was beginning to understand the rhythms of Roberto's world. 5 a.m. training, 7 a.m., business calls in Italian, Spanish, sometimes languages she didn't recognize. 8 a.m., breakfast with whatever associates needed FaceTime. The rest of the day was meetings, more calls, men arriving in dark suits and leaving looking either satisfied or nervous. And through it all, Roberto moved with the precision of a man who controlled everything around him. Until the morning, Marco burst into the library where Teresa was reading to Irene. "Boss, we found him." Roberto looked up from his laptop, his expression sharpening. "Where?" "Philadelphia." He used a credit card dummy account, but sloppy. "We tracked it to a hotel in Center City." Marco's gaze flicked briefly to Teresa, "And we found the storage unit." Teresa's blood went cold. "What storage unit?" Roberto stood slowly, his attention fixed on Marco. "Show me." Marco pulled out a tablet, tapping through screens before turning it toward Roberto. Teresa couldn't see from where she sat, but she watched Roberto's jaw tighten, watched his fingers curl into a fist on the desk. "When?" Roberto's voice was dangerously quiet. "Unit was rented 8 months ago, paid through an account under the name Teresa Conrad." The room tilted. Teresa stood, Irene's book forgotten. "That's not possible. I never." "Newark facility, same one from the security footage." Marco's tone was apologetic but firm. "The ledger's there. Has to be. Clay wouldn't have risked keeping it anywhere else." Roberto's eyes met Teresa's across the room, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw doubt there, just a flicker, but enough to make her stomach drop. "I didn't rent any storage unit," she said, hearing the desperation in her voice. "I've told you Clay used my name, my identity. I had nothing to do with any of this." "Then explain why the account used to pay for it has your signature on the authorization forms." Roberto turned the tablet toward her. "Explain why surveillance footage shows someone matching your description visiting the facility twice in the past 6 months." Teresa stared at the grainy security image. A woman, roughly her height and build, dark hair, face obscured by sunglasses and a baseball cap. It could have been her, could have been anyone. "That's not me." "Are you certain?" A new voice, cold and sharp. Teresa turned to find a man standing in the doorway, similar features to Roberto but harder, his expression carved from ice. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like you." Roberto's shoulders tensed. "Luca, I didn't call for you." "No, but Marco did." Someone needs to think clearly here. Luca Vialli moved into the room with the same controlled grace as his brother, but where Roberto's presence commanded respect, Luca's demanded fear. You've been harboring a woman for 3 days based on nothing but her word and your instinct. The pause before instinct was loaded with implication. Meanwhile, Clay surfaces in Philadelphia, and suddenly we find a storage unit in her name containing our ledger. We don't know the ledger's there yet, Roberto said. Don't we? Luca pulled out his phone, scrolling briefly before showing Roberto something that made his brother's expression darken. Clay made 2 calls from that hotel, both to a Newark number, both to a phone registered to Teresa Conrad's old address. Teresa's knees felt weak. I don't have a Newark number. I've never even been to Newark except... She stopped, memory surfacing. Except once, 2 years ago. Clay said we needed to pick something up from a friend. We drove there, he went into a building for 10 minutes, and we left. What building? Roberto's voice was controlled, but she heard the edge beneath it. I don't know, some warehouse district. He didn't tell me details, he never did. Luca laughed, the sound bitter. Convenient. She doesn't know, doesn't remember, wasn't involved, and yet evidence keeps pointing directly at her. He turned to Roberto. Brother, I respect your authority, but this woman is either complicit or the most elaborate plant I've ever seen. Either way, she's a liability. She's under my protection. Why? Luca's question cracked like a whip. Because she has a sad story? Because you feel sorry for her? He stepped closer to Roberto, his voice lowering but still audible. Or because you're thinking with something other than your head? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Careful, Luca. Roberto's voice was silk over steel. Someone needs to say it. Luca gestured toward Teresa. You've brought her into our home, given her access to our routines, our security, and for what? A woman whose husband stole from us, whose name is on every piece of evidence, who conveniently knows nothing despite being in the center of everything. Luca, that's enough. No, it's not. Luca's eyes were cold as they fixed on Teresa. I want her out. Today. Before she compromises us further. That's not your decision to make. Then you're making a mistake. Luca turned back to his brother. And when it blows up in your face, when she betrays you or gets us all killed, remember I warned you. He left, his footsteps echoing down the marble hallway. The silence he left behind was suffocating. Teresa found her voice first. He's right. Roberto looked at her sharply. What? He's right. You don't know me. You don't know if I'm telling the truth, and every day I stay here, I'm a risk to you and your family. She swallowed hard. Maybe you should listen to him. No. Roberto moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. Luca sees threats everywhere. It's what makes him good at his job, but he's wrong about you. How can you possibly know that? Because I've spent 3 days watching you. Roberto's intensity was almost physical. Watching how you are with your daughter, how you flinch every time one of my men walks by, how you've barely eaten because you're too anxious to keep food down. That's not the behavior of a plant or a co-conspirator. That's the behavior of someone terrified and trying to survive. Teresa's eyes burned. But what if the evidence is right? What if somehow I am involved and don't remember? What if Clay did something, drugged me, manipulated me, and I helped him without knowing? Then we'll figure it out together. Roberto's voice softened slightly. But I'm not throwing you out based on Luca's paranoia and circumstantial evidence. Why not? The question came out raw. Why are you protecting me? You barely know me. I'm nobody, just like Myra said, just some teacher with a sick kid and a criminal ex-husband. Why risk everything for that? Roberto looked at her for a long moment, and Teresa saw something shift in his expression, something vulnerable breaking through the controlled exterior. Before he could answer, a small voice from the couch interrupted. Mama? I don't feel good. Teresa spun around. Irene was curled on her side, her face flushed, her breathing shallow. Baby? Teresa crossed to her in 3 steps, pressing her hand to Irene's forehead. Burning. Oh God, Roberto, she's burning up. Roberto was already moving, phone out. Marco, get the car, now. He looked at Teresa. Get her coat. We're going to Dr. Castellano. Who's? Private physician. 20 minutes from here. Move Teresa. The next 20 minutes blurred together. Teresa wrapped Irene in a blanket while Roberto carried her to the Jeep. Marco drove like the vehicle had wings, eating up highway miles while Teresa held Irene in the back seat, whispering reassurances she didn't believe. Roberto sat beside her, his hand steady on Irene's small wrist, checking her pulse with surprising gentleness. 98, he said quietly. Elevated but not dangerous. She'll be okay, Teresa. You don't know that? Yes, I do. His certainty was absolute. Dr. Castellano is the best. He'll take care of her. The doctor's office was in a brownstone, in an expensive neighborhood, the kind of place that screamed discretion. Dr. Castellano himself met them at the door, an older man with kind eyes who asked no questions about the late hour or the nature of Roberto's business. He examined Irene with gentle efficiency while Teresa hovered, unable to sit still, her heart in her throat. Same infection as before, Dr. Castellano said finally. Respiratory. She needs stronger antibiotics and rest. I'll write the prescription. No pharmacy, Roberto said. Call it in to our supplier. I want it delivered within the hour. The doctor nodded, unsurprised. Of course. 2 hours later, they were back at the mansion. Irene was asleep in her princess bed, new medication already administered, her fever beginning to break. Teresa sat beside her, holding her daughter's small hand, tears she'd been holding back finally spilling over. She didn't hear Roberto enter until he spoke. She'll be okay. Teresa nodded, not trusting her voice. Roberto moved closer, and to her surprise, he sat on the edge of the bed, this powerful, dangerous man, making himself small and gentle in a child's room. When I was 8, my mother got sick, he said quietly. Really sick. And my father, he couldn't afford the medication she needed, so he did what he had to do, made deals with people he shouldn't have, got involved in things that eventually consumed him. Roberto looked at Irene's sleeping face. But my mother lived, and I learned something important that night. What? Teresa whispered. That sometimes the only thing that matters is keeping the people you love safe. Everything else, pride, fear, what other people think, it's all just noise. He looked at Teresa. You asked me why I'm protecting you. That's why. Because I understand what it means to be desperate, to do anything to save someone you love. Teresa's throat tightened. Thank you. For tonight. For her. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do, she met his eyes. Luca thinks I'm using you. Myra thinks I'm competition. But you've shown me more kindness in 3 days than Clay did in 3 years. So yes, I need to thank you. Roberto was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, he reached out and brushed a tear from her cheek. The touch was brief, barely there, but it sent electricity through her entire body. Get some rest, Teresa. Tomorrow we deal with the storage unit. Tonight, just be a mother. He stood and moved toward the door. Roberto? He paused, looking back. You're a good man. Whatever else you are, whatever your world looks like, you're good. I see that now. Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, or disbelief, as if no one had ever said those words to him before. Sleep, Teresa. We'll talk in the morning. He left, closing the door softly behind him. And Teresa sat in the dim light of her daughter's room, holding Irene's hand and trying to understand when exactly Roberto Vialli had stopped being her captor and started becoming something else entirely. Something she wasn't ready to name, but couldn't deny. The attack came at dawn. Teresa woke to the sound of gunfire's sharp cracks that shattered the morning silence like glass. For a disorienting second, still trapped between sleep and waking, she thought it was a car backfiring. Then she heard shouting, the sound of running feet, and Marco's voice bellowing orders from somewhere below. Irene? Teresa threw off the covers and ran to her daughter's room. Empty. The bed was still warm, the sheets thrown back, but Irene was gone. Terror, white-hot and absolute, flooded Teresa's system. Irene. Her door burst open. One of Roberto's men, she thought his name was Vincent, grabbed her arm. Miss Boyce, we need to move you to the safe room. My daughter, where's my daughter? Marco's got her, ma'am, but we need to... Another burst of gunfire, closer this time. The window behind Teresa exploded inward, glass showering across the floor. Vincent shoved her down, his body covering hers as bullets tore through the air where she'd been standing. Stay down. He pulled his weapon, returning fire toward the shattered window. Into his radio. East wing compromised. I've got Teresa, but we're pinned. The door exploded inward. 3 men in black tactical gear poured through, weapons raised. Vincent managed to take down one before the second shot him twice in the chest, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. He dropped beside Teresa, blood spreading across his shirt. "No, no, no!" Teresa pressed her hands against the wounds, but there was so much blood. Too much. "Where's the ledger?" The man standing over her spoke with a thick accent. Russian, maybe. He grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. "Clay's wife, you know where he hid it. Tell me now, or the kid dies first." "I don't know, I swear I don't." His fist connected with her face, stars exploding across her vision. She tasted copper. Wrong answer. He dragged her upright, his gun pressing against her temple. "Let's go find the little girl, see if that improves your memory." They hauled Teresa into the hallway, past Vincent's body, past the destruction of what had been her sanctuary. She could hear fighting throughout the mansion, the distinctive crack of Roberto's men returning fire, orders being shouted, the organized chaos of a war zone. And somewhere in all that chaos was Irene. They were halfway down the stairs when she heard it, her daughter's scream. "Mama!" Something primal tore through Teresa. She twisted in her captor's grip, teeth finding flesh, biting down hard enough to draw blood. He swore, his grip loosening just enough for her to wrench free. She ran toward Irene's voice, ignoring the shouts behind her, ignoring everything except the need to get to her daughter. The main foyer had become a battlefield. Bodies she didn't look too closely sprawled across the marble. One of the attackers had Irene, the little girl fighting and screaming as he dragged her toward the shattered front entrance. "Let her go!" Teresa's voice was barely human, raw with rage and terror. The man turned, and Teresa saw his finger tighten on the trigger. Marco appeared from nowhere, his tackle driving the man sideways. Irene tumbled free, and Teresa was there in a heartbeat, scooping her daughter up, shielding her small body with her own. "Got you, baby. I've got you." Behind them, Marco and the attacker grappled. The sound of bones breaking, a choked scream, then silence. Marco stood over the body, breathing hard, blood on his knuckles. "Get her to the panic room. Northeast corner, go, now." Teresa ran. Irene clutched against her chest, the little girl's sobs muffled against her shoulder. She found the room Marco indicated, reinforced steel door, biometric lock that Marco had apparently programmed to accept her fingerprint. They tumbled inside, and Teresa slammed the door shut, the heavy locks engaging with mechanical finality. The room was small, windowless, lined with monitors showing security feeds throughout the mansion. Teresa could see the fighting continuing, Roberto's men systematically clearing the house, professional and lethal. And then she saw Roberto himself. He moved through the east wing like death incarnate, his weapon an extension of his body. Two attackers rounded a corner. Roberto dropped them both before they could raise their guns. No hesitation, no mercy. Just cold, efficient violence. A third man emerged from a doorway, and Roberto was on him instantly. The gun fell. Roberto's hands found the man's throat, and even on the grainy security feed, Teresa could see the rage in his posture, the absolute wrath in every movement. The man stopped struggling. Roberto let him drop and kept moving. Teresa turned away from the screen, pressing Irene's face into her shoulder so her daughter wouldn't see, but she couldn't unsee it. Couldn't unknow what Roberto Vialli was capable of when someone threatened what he protected. The gunfire gradually ceased. The monitors showed Roberto's men securing the perimeter, checking bodies, establishing that the threat was neutralized. 20 minutes after it began, silence returned to the mansion. A knock on the panic room door made Teresa jump. "Teresa, it's me, open the door." Roberto's voice. Calm despite everything. Teresa's hands shook as she pressed her palm to the scanner. The locks disengaged. Roberto stood in the hallway, his white shirt soaked with blood, some his, some definitely not. His knuckles were raw, his face splattered with red, his eyes still carrying that terrible coldness that made him look like a stranger. Then his gaze found Irene, and something human flickered back into his expression. Is she hurt? No, scared, but not hurt. Teresa's voice came out steadier than she felt. Vincent didn't make it. I'm sorry. Roberto ran a hand through his hair, leaving red streaks. Marco? He saved her. He saved Irene. Roberto nodded once, sharp. 6 attackers total, all dead. But Teresa, his jaw tightened. They knew exactly where you were, knew the layout, knew our security rotation. How is that possible? Only one way. Roberto's expression turned to stone. Someone told them. They found Myra in the library, trying to slip out through the garden doors. Roberto's hand closed around her arm before she'd taken 2 steps onto the terrace. Going somewhere? Myra's perfect composure cracked. Roberto, I can explain. Explain how Clay's associates knew Teresa's exact location? Explain how they knew our security shifts? Explain how 6 armed men got through my gates? Roberto's voice was terrifyingly soft. Please, I'm fascinated to hear this explanation. I didn't know I thought they'd just scare her, make her leave. Myra's words tumbled out in a rush. You weren't supposed to get hurt. No one was supposed to die. I just wanted her gone. You wanted her gone. Roberto repeated the words like he was tasting poison. So you called the Marchetti family and told them where to find the woman I explicitly placed under my protection. You chose her over me? Myra's voice rose, desperation making it shrill. Some nobody with a deadbeat husband and a brat daughter, you threw away what we had for her. We had nothing. I made that clear months ago. Roberto's grip on her arm tightened. But you put Teresa and Irene in danger. You got Vincent killed. You brought war to my home. I love you. You don't know what love is. Roberto's voice was colder than Teresa had ever heard it. Love doesn't betray, doesn't endanger innocent people. Love certainly doesn't get a 5-year-old child nearly killed out of jealousy. He released her arm like it burned him. You have 1 hour to leave New York. If I ever see you again, if I even hear you've spoken my name, I will forget we have history. And what happens after that won't be pretty. Roberto stepped back. Marco will escort you out. Goodbye, Myra. Myra looked at him with tears streaming down her perfect face, mascara running in dark streaks. You'll regret this. She's not worth it, Roberto. She'll never understand your world. Get her out of my sight. Marco appeared, his expression grim, and took Myra's arm. She didn't fight as he led her away, but her eyes found Teresa standing in the doorway with Irene, and the hatred there was palpable. Then she was gone. Roberto stood on the terrace, his back to Teresa, his shoulders rigid with tension. Roberto, Teresa started. Don't. His voice was rough. Just don't. But Teresa moved forward anyway, Irene now safe with Elena upstairs. She approached Roberto slowly, like he was something wild that might bolt. You're hurt. I'm fine. Your arm is bleeding. Roberto looked down at his forearm where his shirt was torn, revealing a deep gash. Knife wound. It's nothing. It's not nothing. Teresa took his hand, the same hand that had killed men less than an hour ago, and led him inside to the library. Sit. To her surprise, he obeyed. She found a first aid kit in the bathroom and returned to find Roberto had removed his ruined shirt. His torso was a map of scars and tattoos, stories written in ink and violence across olive skin. Teresa wet a cloth and began cleaning the wound on his arm. Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced them steady. I should hate you, Roberto said quietly, staring at some point past her shoulder. After what you witnessed today, after seeing what I'm capable of, you should hate me, Teresa. She paused, the cloth still pressed against his arm. Then, carefully, she met his eyes. Maybe I should. Her voice was barely a whisper. Maybe I should be terrified. Maybe I should take Irene and run as far as I can. But I don't. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. You protected us. You killed for us. Vincent died because he was protecting me. Marco risked his life for my daughter. And you? Her throat tightened. You came for us like we mattered, like we were worth the blood and the violence and the risk. You are worth it. The words hung between them, weighted with everything they weren't saying. Teresa resumed cleaning his wound, but Roberto's free hand caught hers, stilling her movements. The touch sent electricity through her entire body. This world, my world, it destroys everything good that touches it, Roberto said, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. I don't want to destroy you. Then don't, Teresa's heart hammered. But don't push me away either, not after everything. They stayed like that, frozen in the moment, both knowing they'd crossed some invisible line but neither willing to name it. Finally, Roberto released her hand, letting her finish bandaging his arm. But when she was done, when she should have stepped away and put distance between them, she found she couldn't move. And Roberto, dangerous, violent, protective Roberto, looked at her like she was something precious, something worth keeping safe, even if it cost him everything. The night Clay Conrad was caught, the rain fell the same way it had the day Teresa's life changed, soft at first, then merciless. The black jeeps rolled through the downpour like moving shadows, headlights cutting clean lines of white through the dark. Teresa stood under the mansion's archway, clutching the edge of her shawl as Roberto stepped out into the storm. His men dragged Clay forward, wrists bound, face bruised, defiance flickering behind bloodshot eyes. He looked nothing like the man she once loved, just a hollow echo wearing his features. "Teresa," he rasped, rain streaming down his cheeks. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," she interrupted, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You used my name, my address, my life, again." Clay's jaw tightened. "I had no choice. They would have killed me." Roberto's presence at her side was silent but thunderous. "And so you offered her instead?" Clay's smirk returned, the one that always meant he'd given up on sincerity. "You think she'll survive you, Viale? She's a teacher, not a killer, not one of you." The words sliced through the air like lightning. Teresa's breath caught as she saw Roberto's knuckles whiten. For a second, she thought he might hit Clay, but he didn't. He stepped back, jaw flexing, voice controlled. "You're not worth the blood on my hands." Clay laughed bitterly. "You already ruined her. Look at her living in your cage." That was the moment Teresa moved. She stepped between them, rain pooling at her feet, chin lifting higher than fear could reach. "You talk like I'm your victim, Clay, but I stopped belonging to you the day you left Irene hungry and sick while you chased a payday." He froze. "You already left us," she said, softer now but every syllable deliberate. "Now you'll live with what you've done." Her voice broke slightly at the end, not from weakness but from finality, the kind that closes doors forever. Roberto's eyes flickered, something fierce yet protective passing through them. He turned to his men. "Take him." Marco nodded. Within seconds, Clay was shoved into one of the SUVs. The convoy moved with military precision, tires hissing against wet gravel as the vehicles vanished into the dark. Teresa exhaled shakily. "Where are you taking him?" Roberto's answer was calm. "Someplace he can't crawl back from. I've arranged for federal custody and forged evidence. He'll spend the rest of his life wishing he hadn't used your name." She looked up at him, unsure whether to be grateful or terrified. "Justice," she whispered. "Closure," he corrected. "Justice is cleaner than this." By dawn, the storm had passed. Pale sunlight leaked through the bedroom curtains of the Viale estate, painting faint gold lines across the sheets. Teresa stood at the window, suitcase on the floor beside her. Irene slept curled in a blanket behind her, a peaceful bundle of curls and soft breathing. She watched the gardens below the fountains, the gravel paths, the guards switching shifts at the gates. All of it beautiful, all of it borrowed. When Roberto entered, she didn't turn. "So you're leaving," he said quietly. She nodded. "You kept us safe, but this isn't my world." He stepped closer, his reflection appearing beside hers in the glass. "Your world burned the night you sent that message." "I know. You think I want to keep you locked away?" he asked, almost gently. "Every day you were here, I remembered what peace used to feel like." Her throat tightened. Peace isn't supposed to have bodyguards. For the first time, Roberto smiled, a small, tired curve of the lips. "Touché." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. "This is a new life, different name, new address. No one will ever find you or Irene again." She took it with trembling fingers. "You planned all this?" "I plan everything." He said it like a confession. Their eyes met in the glass, hers full of conflict, his full of restraint. "What if I don't take it?" she asked. "Then you'll stay." Silence expanded between them, heavy and fragile. "I don't belong here," she said finally. "You and I, we come from different worlds." Roberto turned her gently toward him. "You keep saying that, but every time the world tried to crush you, you didn't break, you adapted. That's what we do here." She looked away, swallowing the lump in her throat. I need to give Irene something normal." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then go, but don't pretend you're leaving because you're afraid of me." Teresa blinked. "I'm not." He leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then what are you afraid of?" Her pulse stumbled. "Of what comes next." By mid-morning, the jeeps were lined up again, engines humming softly. Teresa walked Irene toward the gates, suitcase trailing behind them. The guards nodded respectfully. She turned once more toward the mansion, toward the man standing at the top of the steps in his black suit, hands in his pockets, face unreadable. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" he called back. "For everything you didn't have to do." He started down the steps, rain-slick stone glinting beneath his shoes. He stopped only a few feet from her, eyes fixed on hers. "You texted the wrong number once," he said quietly. "But what if it wasn't wrong?" Teresa's breath caught. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of wet roses through the air. Irene laughed suddenly, chasing a butterfly near the gate, her small shoes splashing through puddles. Roberto watched her for a moment, then looked back at Teresa. "Some mistakes are fate wearing a disguise," he murmured. Teresa smiled faintly, tears blurring her vision. "Then maybe fate finally has good timing." They stood there for a heartbeat too long, two worlds that should never have met, stitched together by accident and survival. Finally Teresa turned, walking Irene toward the waiting car. The driver opened the door, the little girl climbed in, giggling. Teresa looked over her shoulder one last time. Roberto was still there, watching not the Mafia boss now, but the man who had quietly rewritten her destiny. As the convoy eased through the gates, she noticed the reflection of the jeeps in the school windows down the road. The same dark vehicles that once terrified her now moved like guardians, escorting her towards something new. Home. Or whatever came closest. If this story gripped your heart or gave you chills, don't forget to tap that like button and subscribe for more cinematic stories of love, danger, and destiny. And when you finish here, stay with us, watch one of the stories on your screen right now. Each one dives even deeper into the dark and beautiful chaos where passion meets power. Because sometimes, one wrong number is just fate dialing in,